Smoke drifted through the cracked cabin of a ship that should not have been flying at all. Wires hung loose from the ceiling, sparking now and then, and the air smelled of burnt metal. Inside a nest of torn cloth and scavenged blankets sat a single large egg, its shell glowing faintly with a soft golden light. Kaya curled her long body around it, her claws digging into the metal floor as another jolt shook the ship. She had been flying for 3 days without rest, and her fuel was almost gone. She had one choice left, and she hated it. Ahead, through the cracked window, floated Halden Station. It was a human outpost, built after the war between her people and theirs had finally gone quiet. Kaya had sworn she would never set foot on anything built by human hands again, but the egg was close to hatching, and her ship could not survive another jump through open space. She sent a signal, asking for shelter, and waited with her jaw clenched tight. The station answered faster than she expected. A calm voice told her she was cleared to dock, and that a medical team would be ready. Kaya did not trust calm voices. In her experience, humans used calm words right before they did something cruel. She remembered the day her mate had been killed, shot down by a human patrol that later claimed it was a mistake. No apology had ever felt like enough. The docking bay doors opened, and Kaya stepped out first, standing tall so every human in the room could see exactly how dangerous she was. Her scales were a deep green, catching the light in sharp flashes, and her wings folded tightly against her back. Behind her, still hidden in the ship, the egg pulsed with warmth. A small group of humans stood near the entrance, watching her carefully. Most of them looked nervous. One did not. He was tall, with tired eyes and rolled-up sleeves, and he carried a case of tools instead of a weapon. He introduced himself as Daniel, an engineer who also studied alien biology. He said he had read about Sci-Fi eggs, though he admitted he had never seen one in person. Kaya studied him for a long moment. She did not answer his introduction. Instead, she told the room, in a voice that left no room for argument, that no human was to touch the egg without her permission. Daniel nodded slowly and said that was fair. He did not try to argue with her, and he did not try to get closer than she allowed. That, more than anything, was the only reason she let him stay in the room at all. The station's administrator, a nervous man named Rowan, tried to explain the rules of the outpost. He spoke about treaties and protocols and how important it was that nothing go wrong during her stay. Kaya barely listened. She kept her eyes on the egg and on the humans standing near it. She noticed the way some of them flinched when she moved too quickly and the way others stared at her with open curiosity instead of fear. Daniel was one of the second kind. That night, Kaya was given a private chamber near the medical bay, with walls reinforced to hold her weight and her heat. She refused to sleep, curling herself around the egg instead. Through a small window, she watched the stars slide past outside the station and thought about how far she was from home. Her people had fought a long war against these humans. She had lost her mate, her clan's territory, and nearly her own life. Now she was asking the same species for help. A knock came at her door sometime after midnight. It was Daniel again, holding a tray of warm minerals that Sci-Fi were known to need before hatching season. He said he had read that the egg's shell needed a certain heat and mineral balance to stay healthy, and he wanted to make sure she had what she needed. Kaya stared at the tray for a long moment before finally letting him set it down just outside the reach of her tail. She did not thank him. She was not ready for that. But she noticed that he did not ask for anything in return, and he did not try to touch the egg, even though his eyes lingered on it with obvious fascination. When he left, she allowed herself to relax slightly, though she kept one eye on the door for the rest of the night. Over the next 2 days, the egg's glow grew brighter, and its warmth increased. Grace, a doctor on the station, came to check on it with careful, gentle hands, always asking permission first. Kaya gave it reluctantly, watching every movement. She still expected betrayal at any moment. She had seen enough of humans in war to believe that kindness was often just patience before a trap. But no trap came. Instead, small moments of care built up, one after another. Daniel brought warm minerals every evening. Grace checked the egg's temperature without ever raising her voice. Rowan kept the rest of the station's cautious workers away from Kaya's chamber, giving her space instead of forcing meetings and paperwork on her exhausted body. On the third night, the egg began to shake. A hairline crack appeared near its top, and a soft chirping sound came from inside. Kaya's heart pounded. She had waited for this moment for months, across a war-torn galaxy, through a broken ship and an enemy's station. She curled tightly around the egg, refusing to let anyone near, and watched as the first crack spread slowly across the glowing shell. Whatever happened next, she promised herself, she would protect her child with everything she had left. Outside her door, unaware of what was coming, Daniel walked back toward the control room, already thinking about ways to keep the incubation system steady through the night. He had no idea that in a few hours, everything about his life was about to change. Lightning struck the outer hull of Halden station just after midnight, and every light in the medical wing flickered once before dying completely. The backup generators groaned to life, but they were weak, built for small emergencies, not for the storm now battering the station's shields. In the chamber where Kaya kept watch over her cracking egg, the warm golden glow that had been steady for days suddenly dimmed to almost nothing. Kaya let out a sound that was not quite a roar and not quite a cry. The egg needed heat to hatch safely. Without it, the shell could harden again, trapping the hatchling inside, or worse, the cold could stop the tiny heartbeat she could just barely hear if she pressed her ear close enough. She clawed at the wall panel, trying to force the backup systems to respond, but the controls were built for human hands, with buttons too small and switches too delicate for her claws. Alarms rang through the station's corridors. Daniel was already awake, thrown out of a half-finished nap by the sound of the storm hitting the outer shielding. He ran through the halls toward the medical wing, dodging startled crew members who were still trying to figure out what was happening. When he reached Kaya's chamber, he found her pressed against the wall panel, her claws leaving deep scratches in the metal, and the egg behind her losing its glow with every passing second. He did not wait for permission. He grabbed his tool case and dropped to his knees beside the damaged panel, prying it open despite Kaya's warning growl. He told her, quickly and honestly, that he needed to reroute power from the far side of the station and that it would take a few minutes, and that she needed to trust him or the egg would not survive the night. Kaya's every instinct told her to throw him out of the room. Instead, she stepped back just enough to let him work, her whole body shaking with the effort of staying still. The storm grew worse outside. The station shuddered under another strike, and sparks burst from the panel Daniel was working on, burning a thin line across his arm. He did not stop. He kept pulling wires, twisting them together with steady hands, ignoring the pain and the growing smell of burnt plastic. Kaya watched him work, torn between fear for her child and a strange, unfamiliar respect for the human risking his own safety for a creature he barely knew. Finally, with a shower of sparks and a low hum, the heating system kicked back on. The golden glow returned to the egg, faint at first, then steady. Daniel collapsed backward, breathing hard, his arm bleeding from the shock burn. Kaya rushed to the egg, curling around it, checking every inch of the shell for damage. It was then that she noticed the crack from before had spread wide open. The egg trembled once, twice, and then split apart completely. A small, wet creature tumbled out onto the blankets, its scales a pale silver blue, its wings folded tightly against a body no bigger than a human infant. It let out a thin, high cry and blinked its eyes open for the first time. Kaya moved forward instantly, ready to be the first thing her daughter saw, but the hatchling's eyes did not fix on her. They fixed on Daniel, still sitting on the floor a few feet away, clutching his burned arm. The tiny creature crawled toward him on unsteady legs, chirping softly, and pressed her small head against his uninjured hand. Kaya froze. Every Scythari knew the old law of hatching, even if most had never seen it happen outside of old stories. The first face a hatchling truly saw, the first heartbeat she felt against her own, became her bonded parent. It was not a matter of blood or species. It was instinct older than memory, buried deep in Scythari biology, impossible to undo once it happened. She had crossed half a galaxy to bring her daughter into a safe world of her own kind. Instead, in a single stormlit night, her daughter had bonded herself to a human she had known for only 3 days. Kaya let out a sound of pure grief and anger, loud enough that Grace came running into the room, followed closely by Rowan, both stopping short at the sight in front of them. Daniel looked as shocked as anyone. He had no idea what he had just done, only that a small trembling creature was now pressed against his hand, refusing to let go. He looked up at Kaya, unsure whether to apologize or explain, and found no easy words for either. Kaya wanted to scream at him, to blame him for something that was never his choice to make. But looking at her daughter's small, hopeful eyes fixed on the human who had just saved her life, she could not force the anger to fully form. She had seen this bond before once, long ago, between a hatchling and its true parent. She recognized the unmistakable pull in her daughter's small body, a pull that could not be broken by anger or distance or even a mother's wishes. She sank down beside them, her great head lowering until it was level with the two smaller figures. The hatchling, sensing her mother's presence at last, reached out one small claw toward Kaya as well, chirping softly as if trying to hold both of them at once. Kaya closed her eyes, forcing down the storm of feelings inside her chest, and made herself a promise. She could not undo what had happened tonight, but she could watch, she could wait. And if this human ever gave her a single reason to regret allowing him near her daughter, she would not hesitate to take her back, no matter what ancient law stood in her way. For now, though, she allowed herself one small moment of relief. Her daughter was alive, healthy, and breathing steadily in the arms of a stranger who had just risked his life to save her. It was not the beginning Kaya had wanted, but it was a beginning all the same. 6 weeks after the storm, the hatchling was already the size of a large dog, and she had a name. Kaya had chosen it herself, a soft sound in the old Scythari tongue that meant something close to little light in darkness. Humans on the station simply called her Nyx, and the name had stuck faster than anyone expected. By now, most of Halden's station knew her, and most of them had stopped being afraid of the small silver-blue dragon who liked to chase loose bolts down the hallways. Kaya had tried more than once to weaken the bond between her daughter and Daniel. She spent long hours with Nyx alone, teaching her the old songs of her people, feeding her by hand, sleeping curled around her at night the way a proper Scythari mother should. Nyx loved these moments. She listened closely to every song and repeated the sounds back in a clumsy, high-pitched voice that made Kaya's chest ache with something close to pride. But no matter how much time passed, whenever Nyx heard Daniel's footsteps in the hallway, she would abandon whatever she was doing and run straight for him, wings half spread, calling out sounds that were not quite words yet, but clearly meant to be his name. Grace explained it to Kaya one afternoon as gently as she could. She said that in her studies of Scythari biology, the first bond was not something that faded with time or effort. It was written into the hatchling from the moment of hatching, as permanent as the color of her scales. Kaya already knew this, of course. She had known it the night Nyx was born, but hearing it confirmed by a human doctor in a human's calm, scientific voice made the truth harder to ignore. Daniel, for his part, tried never to push the boundaries Kaya had drawn around herself and her daughter. He asked before holding Nyx. He asked before feeding her anything new. He spent hours reading through old records about Scythari customs, trying to understand traditions that had never been written down for humans to study. Sometimes he got things wrong, and Kaya would correct him sharply, and he would nod and adjust without complaint. Slowly, without either of them fully noticing, a kind of routine formed between them, built not on trust exactly, but on consistency. The station itself was not without its problems. Word had spread beyond Halden that a Scythari hatchling was living among humans, and not everyone approved. A government inspector arrived one morning, a stiff, unfriendly man who spoke about safety regulations while eyeing Nyx as though she were a piece of dangerous equipment rather than a child. He suggested, more than once, that the hatchling should be moved to a proper containment facility, somewhere with reinforced walls and trained handlers, away from the general station population. Kaya's claws had come out before she even realized it, but it was Daniel who stepped between her and the inspector first. He spoke calmly, but firmly, listing off every safety protocol already in place, every precaution the medical team had taken, every reason why moving Nyx would cause far more harm than leaving her where she was. Rowan backed him up, showing the inspector reports and readings that proved the hatchling posed no danger to anyone on the station. The inspector left unconvinced, but unable to force the issue, at least for now. That night, Kaya found herself standing outside Daniel's small quarters, unsure why she had walked there at all. When he opened the door, surprised to see her, she said only that she wanted to thank him for what he had done earlier. The words came out stiff and awkward, as though she had never said them before. In truth, she rarely had, not to anyone, and certainly never to a human. Daniel did not make a large deal of it. He simply said that Nyx mattered to him too, and that he would keep speaking up for her whenever it was needed. Kaya studied his face for a long moment, searching for the deception she still expected to find. She found only tiredness and a strange, quiet sincerity that unsettled her more than anger would have. Over the following days, small things continued to shift. Kaya allowed Daniel to join their evening lessons, watching carefully as he practiced the old songs alongside Nyx, his human voice clumsy but earnest. She allowed him to help teach Nyx how to control her growing fire, a dangerous skill that required patience and careful supervision. She even allowed herself, once or twice, to laugh at the sight of Nyx trying to copy Daniel's walk instead of her own graceful glide, stumbling over her own small feet in the process. None of this erased the years of war behind Kaya's eyes. She still remembered losing her mate. She still remembered every human who had once looked at her people as nothing more than dangerous animals to be controlled or destroyed. But she was beginning, slowly and reluctantly, to separate those memories from the man now sitting cross-legged on the floor of her chamber, letting her daughter climb over his shoulders while he tried, badly, to sing a lullaby in a language that was not his own. Late one evening, after Nyx had finally fallen asleep between them, exhausted from a full day of lessons and mischief, Kaya found herself speaking quietly to Daniel about her old life, about the war, about the mate she had lost. She had never told a human any of it before. Daniel listened without interrupting, without offering empty comfort, simply present in the silence that followed each memory she shared. It was not forgiveness. Kaya was not ready for that, and perhaps never would be, but it was something new, something she had not expected to find on a human station she had once sworn never to trust. Outside, the stars moved slowly across the dark sky, indifferent to the quiet, fragile understanding beginning to grow inside that small, warm room. The lights in the outer docking ring went dark first, cut off remotely by someone who clearly knew the station's systems better than a random raider should. Rowan's console flashed red a second later, warning of a breach at the secondary airlock, one of the weaker points Daniel had flagged days earlier. There had been no time to fully reinforce it. Holly's crew had found it anyway. Kaya heard the alarm through the thin walls of the medical wing and felt every muscle in her body tighten. She pressed Nyx behind her, deep into the corner of the reinforced chamber, and told her daughter, in the firmest voice she could manage, to stay hidden no matter what she heard. Nyx's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded and pressed herself into the shadows without argument, some deep instinct telling her this was not a moment for questions. Daniel arrived moments later, breathing hard from running the length of the station. He carried a heavy tool case in one hand, not a weapon exactly, but something he had modified over the past 2 days into a makeshift defense. He told Kaya that security had spotted at least 6 armed intruders moving through the outer ring, heading toward the medical wing with clear purpose. They were not searching randomly. They knew exactly where they were going. Grace's voice came through the station's internal comm system, tight with controlled panic, warning that 2 of the security officers had already been injured trying to slow the intruders down near the main junction. Rowan ordered every remaining defender to fall back toward the medical wing, forming a final line between Holly's crew and the hatchling they had come to find. The first intruders reached the corridor outside Kaya's chamber within minutes. Daniel and 2 security officers braced themselves behind a barrier of overturned equipment, weapons ready, while Kaya stood just inside the doorway, her body coiled tight, fire building low in her throat. When the first armed figure rounded the corner, she did not wait for him to raise his weapon. A burst of controlled flame forced him back around the corner, buying precious seconds. The fight that followed was chaotic and fast. Shots rang out, aimed carefully to avoid direct hits on Kaya, since Holly's clearly wanted her alive, useful as either a bargaining tool or a research subject alongside her daughter. Daniel fought beside the security officers, using his modified tool case as a shield and improvised weapon, taking down one intruder with a well-placed strike before ducking back behind cover as return fire tore through the wall above him. Kaya fought like something out of an old war story, but even she was not untouchable. A stray shot caught her along the shoulder, forcing a pained roar from her throat and knocking her briefly off balance. 2 more intruders used the opening to push forward, past the broken barrier, straight toward the chamber where Nyx was hiding. Daniel saw them coming and moved without thinking. He threw himself into the doorway, blocking the only path into the small chamber, his tool case raised in front of him as though it could somehow stop a weapon built to kill. One of the intruders sneered and told him to step aside, that they only wanted the creature, not him. Daniel did not move. He said, in a voice far steadier than he felt, that they would have to go through him first. The intruder raised his weapon, and for a moment it seemed nothing was going to stop what came next. Then a wall of green fire erupted from down the corridor, forcing both intruders to stumble back, their clothes smoking at the edges. Kaya had recovered enough to drag herself upright, blood soaking one shoulder, fury blazing in her eyes brighter than any flame. She placed herself beside Daniel, matching his position exactly, her massive form now blocking the doorway alongside his much smaller one. Together they held the line. Daniel fought with whatever strength and tools he had left, while Kaya's fire drove back every attempt to push past them. The security officers rallied behind them, finally able to regroup and return fire with proper aim now that the line was stable. One by one, Holly's remaining crew either fell back or were captured, their carefully planned raid falling apart faster than they had expected. Holly's himself was found trying to escape through the same secondary airlock his crew had breached, caught by station security before he could reach his ship. He struggled and shouted threats about future attempts, about how this was not over, but no one in the corridor was listening anymore. The fighting was done. In the sudden quiet afterward, Kaya sank to the floor beside the chamber doorway, her strength finally giving out now that the danger had passed. Daniel dropped down beside her, exhausted, his hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. Behind them, Nyx crept out from her hiding place, chirping in fear and relief, pressing herself between the two of them as though trying to make sure both were really still there. Kaya wrapped one wing around her daughter, and after a brief pause, extended it slightly further, covering Daniel as well, an old Scythari gesture reserved only for family. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Daniel understood the gesture for what it was and simply leaned back against her side, closing his eyes for the first time in what felt like days, finally allowing himself to believe that Nyx and all of them were truly safe. News of the attack on Halden Station spread faster than anyone expected, carried along old trade routes by the same pilot who had first warned Rowan about Holly's. Within days, official investigators arrived, along with reporters eager to cover a story unlike anything they had seen since the war ended. A human station standing together with a Scythari mother to defend her hatchling against a disgraced human commander. The story did not paint humanity in a flattering light at first, given who Holly's had once been, but it did something else entirely once the full details came out. Recordings from the station's security system showed everything clearly, Daniel standing between armed intruders and a frightened hatchling, Kaya fighting alongside human defenders instead of against them, security officers risking their own safety for a child who was not even their own species. The footage spread quickly across human and Scythari networks alike, sparking conversations that had been avoided for years since the ceasefire. Holly's was taken into custody and formally charged, not just for the attack on Halden Station, but for the older crimes he had managed to escape punishment for during and after the war. His capture, combined with the footage of Daniel and Kaya fighting side by side, gave weight to arguments that many diplomats had been struggling to make for years, that peace between humans and Scythari was not just possible, but already quietly happening in small, unnoticed places like Halden Station. A formal delegation arrived 3 weeks later, representing both human government interests and the Scythari Compact, hoping to use the incident as a foundation for a new treaty between the two peoples. Rowan, still slightly overwhelmed by the sudden attention his small research outpost had received, found himself leading tense negotiations he had never trained for, though Daniel and Grace stayed close by, helping wherever they could. Kaya was invited to speak with the Scythari delegation privately, away from human ears. She told them everything about her ship, about the storm, about the hatching, about the human who had bonded with her daughter through no fault or choice of his own. She expected judgment. Instead, the delegation listened carefully, some clearly moved by her account, Others simply relieved that a story like hers had ended without more bloodshed. One elder among the delegation, an old Scythari who remembered the war even more clearly than Kaya did, asked her a single question. He asked whether she still believed, after everything, that humans could never be trusted. Kaya thought about the question for a long moment before answering honestly. She said she did not trust humans as a whole, and perhaps never fully would, not after everything she had lost. But she said she now understood that trust was never something owed to an entire species. It was something earned, one person at a time, through actions rather than words. And Daniel, she said, had earned hers. That evening, in a quiet corner of the station rarely used by anyone else, Kaya performed a ceremony few humans had ever witnessed. She called Daniel and Nyx to stand before her, along with Grace and Rowan as witnesses, and spoke old words in the Scythari tongue that had not been spoken outside her own people in living memory. It was the right of bonded kin, a formal recognition that Daniel was not simply tolerated as Nyx's first bond, but fully accepted as her father in every way that mattered among Scythari tradition. Daniel, unused to ceremonies of any kind, stumbled slightly over the human response Kai had taught him beforehand, earning a small, surprised laugh from her, the first real laugh he had ever heard from her. Nyx, sensing the importance of the moment, even without fully understanding it, pressed herself happily between the two of them, chirping in obvious delight at having both her parents so close together at once. The new treaty between humans and the Scythari Compact was signed 2 months later, using Halden Station as its symbolic location, a place where distrust had slowly, painfully, and honestly turned into something better. It was not a perfect peace. Old wounds on both sides remained, and not everyone was ready to forgive so quickly. But it was a real beginning, built not on empty promises from distant leaders, but on the small, stubborn actions of people who had chosen to trust each other when it would have been far easier not to. Life on Halden Station slowly returned to something resembling normal, though nothing was quite the same as before. Nyx continued to grow quickly, now nearly the size of a small horse, still clumsy on her feet, but growing more graceful in the air every week. She spent her mornings with Kaya, learning the old songs and customs of her mother's people, and her afternoons with Daniel, learning about human tools and machines with the same endless curiosity she brought to everything else. In the evenings, the three of them often gathered on the station's observation deck, watching the stars slide slowly past the reinforced glass. Kaya no longer stood quite so rigid beside Daniel, and Daniel no longer hesitated quite so carefully around Kaya. Between them, Nyx stretched her wings, practicing small, careful flights from one end of the deck to the other, landing sometimes in her mother's arms and sometimes in her father's, never once seeming to notice or care that the two of them came from worlds that had once tried very hard to destroy each other. It was not the family Kaya had imagined for her daughter. It was not the life Daniel had ever expected for himself either. But watching Nyx fly happily between them, neither of them could imagine wanting anything different now.